of God. And if you read what he said in Mark 9, verse 31, for he taught his disciples and said to them, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of men, and they shall kill him, and after that he is killed, he shall rise again the third day. Have you noticed in Christianity today that there's a war on about the 3 days and 3 nights? That Christianity seems to be confused today about which day Jesus died on and which day he resurrected. Because the sign, as we'll see now, is Jonah's 3 days and 3 nights. Read it with me. It says Matthew 12, verse 39 to 40. There shall no sign be given to it, but the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So the common understanding is that Jesus has to be 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. And they calculate 3 days, 3 nights to be 72 hours. So therefore, Jesus couldn't have died on Friday. He must have died on Wednesday. Right? They crucified him on Wednesday. And you have the big calculations of how that was a high day. And you might have heard some of this happen. If you haven't heard it, this is just a prompt to tell you that if you come across the 3 days and 3 nights, give somebody this DVD to watch because they might find their answer. What does it mean, 3 days and 3 nights will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth? That's what we're going to be looking at. There's a 3 days and 3 nights debate. There's actually 3 answers to this. Number 1 is inclusive reckoning. What that means is, and in Jesus' day, one day or a portion of a day was called a day. So if, say, for example, you were to go on a cruise, a ship, you were to buy yourself and your wife a ticket to go on a cruise, they will tell you that this is a 4 days and 3 nights cruise. My question would be to you, does that mean that you are going to be there literally, if you calculate the number of hours, of 4 days and 3 nights? Are you going to be there for that exact literal hour period? Or is there a possible, the first day and the last day are sort of shorter? But the brochure says 4 days and 3 nights. So you have the right to stand on the ship from the midnight to the midnight. Is that what it means? No. Inclusive reckoning means that a day or a portion of the day, just like your cruise brochure, is still referred to as a day. You might get on the ship at 11 o'clock in the morning. Doesn't mean it's only a portion of the day. That's still called the first day, right? So there's one answer. You can see 3 days and 3 nights quite clearly points to Friday, Saturday, Sunday. There's another option, and that's if you study the Gospel of Mark. And the Gospel of Mark, clearly if you read it backwards, interestingly enough, not literally backwards, but you go backwards in time, you'll see that Mark says, from the crucifixion, on the next morning we did the following, and on the next morning we did the following, and on the next morning we did the following. And then all of a sudden he says it was the first day of the week. So if you work backwards now, because you don't know which day it starts, you work backwards from the first day of the week, you will eventually come out and you'll see quite clearly that the Gospel of Mark says Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But if that's not good enough for you, there's another option I'd like to consider, I'd like you to consider, and then you can decide, you must make up your own mind and have the conviction for yourself. And that is the burden of sin. What do I mean by the burden of sin? Well, Sir Austen Henry Layard was an archaeologist. He dug up many of the ruins in Nineveh and Babylon and found the most incredible archaeological finds, right? Now, this gentleman, very, very famous and very well known for his archaeological finds, wrote some very interesting information which we'll get to now. But please read this. The main deity of Nineveh at this time, the time of Jonah, was Dagon, known as the fish god. Dagon was represented by a statue constructed as a half fish, half man. Everywhere Jonah would go in Nineveh, he would be standing under or close to one of those half fish, half man statues of Dagon. So if you were to, say, for example, go to the Vatican, you would be constantly surrounded by pictures of angels carrying the keys or of the tiara, right? You might have seen that if you've been to Rome. In the same way, in Nineveh, the chief deity, the chief god was the fish god Dagon. And there were statues of him all over the place for people to worship this sun fish god, Dagon. Here's an image of this Dagon. You can see the pagan priest here as a half fish, half man, sprinkling his holy water, right? This is from the Pergamum Museum in Berlin. Now, Dagon, the sun fish god, clearly displayed with a fish attire and the mitre. From Orson Henry Louds' book, you can read there, and he says, in their veneration and the worship of Dagon, the high priest of paganism would actually put on a garment that was made from a huge fish. The head of the fish formed a mitre, while its scaly fan-like tail fell as a cloak behind, leaving the human limbs and feet exposed. And you can see that on the left there. So the fish down the back, etc. Let me explain this. You see, because the sun would die at night and go into the sea, the sun would be gobbled up in their belief system. The sun would be gobbled up by the fish god, right? That would be the god of the night, or the fish god. And it was through this process that the fish god would then give rise or give birth again to the sun god. And you would have that cycle of birth, death, etc., through the sun and through the fish, the sun fish god. And this Dagon high priest, wore the mantle of a fish. So they would take a huge fish, poor fish, they would cut it open, and they'd put that, it was quite a stinky sermon, right? Must have been, because they'd take that fish and put the fish over the head with his mouth open, and on his back would be the rest of the fish with a fan-like tail down the back. Now, that when they did their rituals, the Dagon high priest would have his holy water, as you've seen in those archaeological finds. Now, think for a moment how this must have impacted Jonah's preaching ability. Think for a moment, Jonah is on a ship, and here he is, there's a big storm, and they go to him and they say, you are the problem, or he says, I'm the problem. And as a result, they throw him overboard, and he gets eaten up by Dagon, the fish god. It makes sense to the people of the area, right? Then all of a sudden, 3 days later, the fish god spits Jonah out. Now, if you've ever been involved in stomach acids or understand what goes on in the stomach, either human or animal, you'll know that there are acids. So the stomach juices of this fish would have probably eaten the pigment out of out of his skin. So think for a moment. Here's the guy that the fishermen threw into the sea. He was swallowed up by the sun fish god, and all of a sudden, 3 days later, he gets spat out. He's still alive, and he's white as the sun. Right? He's white in his skin color. White, because of the fish. Do you think that the fact that he overcame the fish god, do you think that would have maybe had some impact in his preaching? For sure it would have. And the Lord allowed those processes to take place to show the people that he is more powerful than the sun god. That statue there, the one I'm standing under, Jonah could have said, that's the God that had to spit me out because my God said you must release him. So it was a way of Jonah being able to prove to the people that his God was more powerful, and they had to listen because judgment was coming. Fantastic parallels. And when you understand archaeology and how it fits in with the Bible, the whole Bible comes alive. But realize for a moment, as I showed you in the previous lecture, the previous presentation about the great controversy, that this Dagon sun fish god is the high priest of anti-Yahweh worship. In other words, he's the high priest of Satan worship in the form of sun worship, right? We've explained that. So if you read The Wine of Babylon on page 9, you see quite clearly that the most prominent form of worship in Babylon was dedicated to Dagon, who was later known as Ichthus, or the fish. In Chaldean times, the head of the church was the representative of Dagon. He was considered, the head of the church was the representative of Dagon. In other words, he was the high priest of Dagon. And he was considered to be infallible,